as we start here, I'm going to show you something that I've done in Africa a number of times. I don't expect to get quite the same response as I had here, as I had there, but it's just one of those fun things. So this right here is a tool that I use for teaching different networking concepts and different things like that. If you had gone through a lot of the other sessions, you would realize that this thing in the middle is supposed to have a bunch of lights on it to show that it's on. This one is powered off. And so the object of this is you go over and you click on it and you say, I'm going to power it on. And, sorry, it didn't turn on. Let me try that again. Let me power it on. Okay, sorry, there's a slight glitch. I'm going to actually replace this one. So there we go. Now I'm going to power it on. Now, the name of this particular thing, if you were to look at the top where you can't actually see it, it says, bad power needs UPS. All right? And basically, every single time I power it on, it just sparks and it smokes and stuff. And so I am a white man. And in Africa, my African brothers, they have seen us come over many times and plug our silly 110 electrical items into their 220. And when I start doing this, and I keep doing it over and over, they're like, no, stop! Because in their brain, even though this is just a digital fake thing, they see me blowing up expensive equipment. And anyway, you get wonderful, exciting responses just powering it on and seeing the sparks fly and stuff like that. So we're going to use that a little bit in some of our examples today. Plugging in when the power is out, and that's not talking about do you have a UPS or not, but anyway. Okay, so that was my Edgy Network Builder. That was the name of the thing. There's a link to that tool online if you grab my thing off the NAS, which will be there shortly.
It should be an advertisement for Leon's gadgets.
Yes. We'll plug your thing into my digital software. You can see how it actually works. Okay. So, with that, I'm going to talk just briefly about taking care of a server. Now, again, I spent some time over in Kenya, and so you may have to apologize for some of my solutions to the various things that come up. All right, this is a theoretical situation. Okay. So there's a file server that has a failing drive light that's blinking, all right? Just imagine that. So when I was in Kenya, much to my annoyance, the standard solution was to yank out the hard drive and plug the exact same hard drive back in. All right, it's a RAID, it's a hardware RAID, just pull it out, push it back in, rebuilds, yay, the light stopped blinking. How long is that going to stay stopped blinking? And again, much to my annoyance, that server lasted more than 3 years. I lost contact with that server before that particular hard drive failed, which is really annoying to the teacher. When you're trying to teach the right way to do it, that's going to cause you problems. Nope. Okay, anyway. All right, so in our situation, we're not going to yank it and pull it back, because that might actually save it. We're going to tape over that light. All right? That's the right way to do it. I know a whole bunch of people that do this with their car, that engine light blinking or whatever. Put tape over it. All right, we're good to go. Okay, so here we go. I'm condensing my thing. The bad light is bad hard drive light is blinking. Electrical tape. All right. So now, a second light comes on our server. This one says we have redundant power supplies. One of them is failing. All right, more electrical tape. We got this. Don't say, when you go back to your managers and stuff, this is what we learned at ICCM. This is not that sensitive. Okay. All right. So now, the server starts to whine and grumble and vibrate, make strange, exciting noises. Oh, and growls. All right. So let's put a fan in the room to hide the noise. There we go. Just make something more white noise than the server's making. We're good to go. All right, smoke starts coming out of the server. Hey, we already have a fan. Just put the fan, change its area. Perfect. Smoke gets blown away. All right. Next comes the flames. All right. So we're going to take the server. We're just going to move it away farther from the other servers. So no problem. No problem. All right. The question is there a better way to treat the server?
Hope so.
When we take care of the things when they're small, they don't cascade, they're easier to handle, they don't damage the other things around it, you tend not to lose as much data, right? You all know this. You are that server.
What?
This is, going on this thing. We have warning lights in our lives, and we have a tendency to ignore those lights. We have a tendency to keep pressing on. We have all these responsibilities. The problem is we tend to think that we are finer than we are. And we take over all these warning things. We kind of gloss over them. So I have this story. And on my PowerPoint presentation, I've got a small page of it in this study notes, and so that's why it's there. Just if anyone gets my PowerPoint, they know what I'm talking about. When I was at Taylor University, so when I was growing up, I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. You guys saw pictures of our house that my dad built. We were about 75 miles away from the Grand Canyon, and whenever we would come back home for a missionary trip, my dad would hike in the Grand Canyon as his means of relaxation. I was a good, strong hiker with most of my brothers. We have done a lot of hiking and climbing, and then I went to Taylor University and I played a lot of pickup soccer games. And at the time of this story, I was in probably the best shape of my life. I was running many miles a day, 3 soccer games a week, and a lot of jogging in between to keep in shape. And I had just graduated Taylor. I was hired back on as staff, and they had new student orientation. They brought all the computer guys together, and they had this team building exercise. And they said, all right, guys, we're going to give you a puzzle. And they said, you're at this river. And I don't remember the exact puzzle, but you had to get everybody from one side to the other, but there were these constraints. You couldn't leave 2 people on this side. There was all these things. And we looked at it, and I knew that there was this logical solution to the puzzle. But I looked at it and I said, well, they didn't give us, and the paper form of this problem, the farmer or whatever who was supposed to be taking this stuff across couldn't take more than one thing across at a time. But they didn't have that in the instructions. I said, look, if you all get on my back, I can carry all 3 of you across in one shot and we'll be done right away. Here I am. You guys saw the picture of my mental image of myself. Strong and buff, and we can do this. And I looked at my guys. I had a small team, and they were all, I was the tallest guy. Now, I never really was all that big and bulky, but none of these guys were really big and bulky. And I said, you know what, let's try it. Let's just see what happens. And so I bent down just a little bit, and the first guy jumped on my back. 110 pounds, big whomping college student. Yeah, we can do this. And so the next 110-pound guy jumps on his back, and I strut around a little. This is gonna work. Third guy, and then there was a split in my brain, and here I am lying on the ground, kind of flattened. Wait a second, what happened? And all the guys are getting up off this pile of arms and legs. I don't think this is gonna work. No. We got this. Let me try it again. Second guy gets on. That's working. The third guy, boom! I am flattened. And they're like, no, Tim, I don't think this is going to happen. And I'm like, no, seriously. And they're like, no. They did not try a third time, even though I was convinced that we could still do it. But this is us. This is who we are. We have a tendency to believe that we got this. That in my strength, we can do this God-sized task. This is who we are. Now, one of the things that the Bible says this, you are worth more than a sparrow. We know that. The Bible says that. You've heard this your whole time. You are worth more than a server. All right? That kind of makes sense, but here we go. You should take better care for yourself than you would care for your server. All right? This is simple stuff. You think about the logic. Yeah, all right. So, I'm going to extend this. More rests on your shoulders than rests on the shoulders of your server. Now, a bunch of you guys are going, oh, wait a second. Let's think about the data. There's all this stuff that's on here. But here we go. I have seen it take years or months for an organization to find a new techie. If you find a new techie in months, you are doing awesome. But just as a question here, how many people have searched for a couple years for a techie for their organization? All right? Seriously, this is a real thing. All right? How long does it take to replace your server? Not really all that long. And it's work. Anyway, just to place that in your head. This is because we as techies take amazing care of our servers. We do. We as techies take really poor care of ourselves. All right. We are wearied and dried up. Our pastor at the church recently preached a story about the dried bones in Ezekiel, and I was like, yeah, that is kind of where we're at. God can breathe new life back into us.
Especially after COVID quarantine.
Yes, after quarantine, there's a lot of this going on. We know God can do this. And I mentioned this last time, 1 Peter 4:10, we serve using the gifts you have, but serve using the strength that God provides. This is the weird balance that we're trying to find. Because we know God can give us the strength, and we're like, well, we can pull that hard drive out and push it back in, and God can keep it going. We know that. But at the same time, we also know that there's this tension that we have to keep. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of our servers. We need to serve with the strength that God provides. It's going to take more strength than we have. There's a tension here. Means that serving requires superhuman strength. And yes, God knows that we're going to have those users in our lives. You know what I'm talking about. All right. So a few of the things that I like to encourage people as I swing around. So again, this is information, stuff that has come from my visiting over 180 different offices in 18 countries. These are things that I have repeated over and over and over to people. People have also repeated this over and over to me. A whole bunch of you guys have seen my wife at work this morning. My wife, she's lazy, right? No.
Tim, you want me to cut that from
Yes. My wife is an insane workaholic in various points in time. And she and I have this tension going. I tend not to be as much an insane workaholic unless I'm doing computer stuff. Now, I don't know how many of you have spent time with me, but it is funny. I have had some people tell me that I am the stubbornest person that they know. And a whole bunch of you are like, what? Tim Young? Stubborn? I mean, I'm laid back, I'm friendly, I'm relaxed. I have a very stubborn streak in particular areas, and some of it has to do with technology and stuff. Anyway, I can get so caught up in things. One of the things I have to remind myself is this concept. My time is worth at least minimum wage. Now, some of you guys who draw salary are like, what? Support raised missionaries. The idea behind a support raised missionary is when you come into the organization does not outgo money for you the same way, because as you come in, your money comes in with you. Your salary comes in with you. Your time is basically
Zero.
It's worth nothing because there's no outgo for the organization. And it's a really simple mindset for people to come into is that time is just time. And I like to encourage people that at least think of yourself when in doing this, that time is at least worth minimum wage, whatever that is, and hopefully eventually it will climb because, anyway, there's that political thing going on at the moment that, all right. So Patricia and I, as we're driving along, sometimes we'll take various toll roads because the time saved is more than the time, or the money spent is worth more than the time saved. Anyway, yeah, you know what I'm saying. She's better at math than I am as well. But along with that, computer mice are often not worth fixing because the time spent is worth more than the time to buy a new one. All right, so just we kind of get this little mental thing going here, but while our time is worth at least minimum wage, remember that relationship is priceless. All right? So sometimes fixing that mouse is worth way more than the time and money it would take to replace it because you're building that relationship. All right. So, a little summary so far before we kind of get into more of the statistics and various things we're looking at here. Do not treat yourself as worth more than your users. You kind of know that. It's biblical principles. We're all made in the image of God and of our equal worth. Count your worth as at least minimum wage. And, all right, the sprint versus the marathon. There are times when we have to sprint. That's a part of life. But remember that burnout is a real thing. Now, there's a whole bunch of young people here who haven't got to this point yet. We looked at the stats that said 40% of all IT people were facing burnout. That was 3 years ago. The chance that it's going to happen to you is really high. And if you look around, I have to be careful how I say this, but we'll say that there are a few older IT guys here. Hopefully people that are older than you. They are living proof that you can be IT guys and survive at least until you're a little bit older. Chuck McGinnis is one of our guys who tried to make it here. I don't know exactly how old he is, maybe 83, 84, something like that. He still likes to show up, and he's living proof that you can really get to be a bit older. I'd like to encourage you guys to remember your friends here. When you face these burnout times, I'm hoping that you'll remember that you have friends who have been through it. And I'm going to make you a promise. If you pick up your phone and you call any one of these guys, they will answer and talk to you. It's because they have been here as well. And they know what's going on. Most of us who have been through some of this stuff, we're very, very happy to talk about these things because we know that if you talk about it and work through it, you're more likely to be able to stay in ministry. But burnout is a real thing. A bunch of us have had friends who have burnt out of ministry and are gone. So it's a real thing. All right. If you can pace yourself, you can run much farther and you can get a lot more out of yourself. Now, again, my lovely wife who's over here, we're seeing a moment in her life when she can't pay, and there's just a crunch right now. We will all have those crunches. And she's coming down and she's going to... Okay, just making sure that she didn't need me. So there's going to be this ongoing balance. But one of the big things, this is something I have to remind myself regularly. This is something that you guys remind me of regularly, I remind you of regularly as I go and visit, is this idea of Sabbath rest. Now, a lot of what we're going to be doing later on, I give you guys homework, and one of the homeworks I'm going to be giving you is to talk to each other about what is a Sabbath rest for you. Because it's very, very different for each of us. The day of rest was created by God, and it is a command of God. We need it. And what is Sabbath for us? Sometimes it's time with God. Sometimes it's having hobbies that relax you, that interest you, that give you community. Time spent with each other. ICCM here. How many people think ICCM is Sabbath for them? Okay. Now, that's a really bizarre thing. Because how much sleep did you get? Right? How much rest? ICCM is a weird form of Sabbath, but it is Sabbath for a whole bunch of us. And that's that community. All right, fellowship time, Bible study, a lot of this stuff can be Sabbath for us. For me, I call it guy puttering. Small jobs around the house, things that have a very quick sense of accomplishment with low output. Wow, I fixed that. I tightened the screw. Woohoo! There are little things that, now, big things, when you have to rebuild a porch, no, that is work. But the quick ones, the things that are optional, things that I can get done fast, those to me can be a part of Sabbath. What is not Sabbath? And this is a real hard thing for us because so many of us love computer stuff. So many of us, it is, I can fix it. It can be that quick sense of, I can fix that and get it done. We have too much of that, and it becomes work. It becomes draining. And there's that life-giving work. I've underlined the word work because that cannot be, sometimes that is not rest. Now, this is some of that weird tension. I can't say that one thing is never Sabbath because sometimes it can be. Sometimes the things that we are really good at and takes a very low amount of output from us, sometimes that can actually just really rejuvenate us. Anyway, but it's things that give us renewal to the body, mind, and soul. All right, so I'm going to talk about me again for a second because my life is really weird, and I'm going to tell you what some of my Sabbath is because let's say I'm staying at your organization and I'll visit there for a week. Monday through Friday, I'm in for 8 hours a day working. Now, as some of you guys know, I don't end at the end of the 8-hour day. Usually I will go home and I will visit your house or something like that because I'm staying at your house to eat your food and whatnot. And so I'm looking over at Anthony. I'm going to use Anthony's house as an example because at his house, I visited his place, and at one point in time, he had this tree that had fallen over in his backyard. Now, it wasn't like a small tree, and Anthony will happily show you his tree moving tool. This tree that was back there was not going to be moved by his tree moving tool. This was my arms are not big enough.
6 foot.
6 foot. It was this massive thing. But what was awesome about it was
and 20 foot long.
it was tons and tons of tree. And he had already chopped big chunks of it out with a chainsaw, but there was a whole bunch that was resting. It was right in this little valley area. He was like, how in the world can we get rid of this thing? And he and I spent hours every day working on figuring out this tree. We eventually managed to roll this tree out from the valley it was in and get it on these things that he could pull it on top of other logs so it was raised enough that you could chop it up with the chainsaw. And anyway, I didn't rest. We worked during the day, then we came home and we did physical work. It was mentally and physically exhausting. It was great. So what? You're like, Tim, then at the end of this week when everyone else says, it's the weekend, Tim and Patricia pile into their car, we drive to the next organization, and we start again. So Tim, where is your Sabbath? All right. So our Sabbath is odd. So often during the week, I have a little bit of time where I play computer games with a couple of friends. A few of my ICCM buddies, a few other friends who play computer games. Now I've got a bunch of nephews joining me. I've been doing this for 15 plus years, playing the exact same computer game. And just a fun little community that we play. Probably the most of my Sabbath is actually while we're driving. It's a parcel. I have to stay awake and alert enough while we're at the steering wheel, but I have very few responsibilities to do except to travel. Patricia and I actually spend a little bit of time talking, just husband-wife time. How was your week? We haven't really seen each other much during this week. How are things going on? And after we do that, we listen to books on tape and we just sit there and we drive. Very little brain power going. But I am very careful not to do any work, if I can, while I'm driving, because that is my rest time. That is one of the few times when my brain just kind of, I'm not asleep, but I'm not working during that time. So when I'm at home, again, I've got bite-sized projects. This past time that we were home, I did some painting on the outside. We've got a 2-story house, and I painted the bottom story of it. That was not a part of my Sabbath. That was work. But again, the small things around the house, when my wife says, oh, we need to have a curtain rod hung or something like that, 5-minute projects, that's encouraging for me. I actually do programming for fun. These are projects that have, and some like that Edu Network Builder thing that we saw, I built that. And I did that just because it was fun, it was relaxing, and I didn't have a timeline for it. So I just did it through a course of a couple of years, and that was fun and relaxing. That built me up, and it wasn't work. I do my normal devotions and stuff, but I also have a weird ongoing study of Job that I've been doing. I keep digging into this. I find a lot of interesting stuff. I have very different opinions about the book of Job than most people do. I think it's kind of it's the Gentile book of the Old Testament, and it was stories about Gentiles that the Jews kind of brought into their stuff, but none of the people in it are Jews. And starting kind of from there, I've looked at a whole bunch of different things to figure out that story existed outside of the Bible. It's actually written in, there's versions of it. There's a whole bunch of stuff in Babylon. There's a bunch of writing and stuff there. And you look, in that story is a story that goes beyond just the Jews. And then you start thinking about that, well, if God was going to give one thing to the people outside of his people, what should you give them? But he gave them the book of Job. That's a weird book. That's what he gave them. And so you start digging into it and you really get to see all the stuff, the meat that's in there, and it is truly astounding, all the stuff that God has put into that book. It's awesome. Anyway, I don't want to get onto that too much, but I keep going back to that. I've actually written a whole bunch of programs. I've written some artificial intelligence stuff. For example, you look at the book of Job and you wonder how ingrained it is in the Bible. And for example, it shows up a whole bunch in Psalms. Job is quoted in the Psalms a whole bunch. Jeremiah and Paul, those are the main people who quote the book of Job. And anyway, kind of neat stuff scattered all around. I wrote a program to find all this stuff. And that's exciting for me. It's fun, it's relaxing, and it's not work. And I do that sort of stuff on my Sabbath. This kind of helps me wind down. Reading in bed at night and stuff. Okay, Sabbath. Remember that Sabbath is a command, and it once held the death penalty for not adhering to it. You know, that's kind of a weird thing, right? You rest, or we'll kill you. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Rest is so critical to us that it was worth making that point. It was worth people's lives to make the point to the rest of us that it's important. All right, we're going to come back to some of that, but we also need to balance our life as techies. This is another one of the things. So when I was at Taylor University, I was a part of the missionary kids group, and I spent a lot of time with the equivalent of our kids. And probably the biggest complaint that the kids had was our parents loved the ministry more than they loved us. This is a relatively common thing for missionary kids to have, particularly people on the field and stuff like that. I've seen both sides. I know how much parents love their kids. But what tends to happen is it's easy for us to get so tied into the projects that we're doing that the family comes second at a time, and we need to make sure that we keep them as a priority, that we communicate that to them. All right, so yeah, balance at work. But remembering that relationships are priceless. I'm going to keep pulling this back up a couple more times, because as we balance all these things, yeah, all right. So as we're thinking about balance, I've mentioned this a few times. We are working on a God-sized task. Missions is a God-sized task. We have to remember that. We cannot complete this on our own. If you try to take on the God-sized task, you will burn out. I can guarantee it. Mathematically, it's obvious. God. Okay. Mathematically, we can do it. It's hard figuring this out as we live our life, because that's where the rubber really hits the road. But this is my challenge. This is my challenge. Meaning not just I'm giving it to you. This is a hard thing for me to do. It's hard for my wife to do. We struggle with this a lot. How can we leave various things in God's lap? This is how faith meets IT. Is when we're looking at these things and we say, do I fix the server? Or I had a really good example. This annoyed the dickens out of me, but it was awesome. I was helping this guy remotely. We were trying to back up his server. We ran his system through a backup. This is one of those old backup things where you plug the CD in and it changes the boot mode so that it boots up into its own operating system. It does the backup to a hard drive, and then you reboot it again, and it goes back to its normal thing. And we did that. We did the backup, and we went to reboot it, and it kept coming up into the backup software. The master boot record was set up to always boot off the secondary operating system. And basically what you have to do back then, you run,
fdisk/mbr.
Yes, fdisk/fixmbr. We know that. I basically had to walk him through that last little bit. It was a Friday afternoon, he had just a little bit more to go, and he says, Tim, I gotta stop. And I'm like, what? But your server's down. It's your email server. You won't be able to get email until, it won't be able to fix it till the weekend or till Monday. He's like, no problems. We can live without email. He says, I'm about to take a team out. We're going street evangelism. So I'll catch you later. fdisk/fixmbr. Boom. That's all you need. But I'm out of it. He did. He left. He went. He did his street evangelism. Server was down all weekend. I didn't hear any complaints from, now, there may have been people screaming and crying in his organization. I don't know. But he left that in God's lap. He said, I've got different priorities here. That is hard. That was hard on me. It wasn't my server, but anyway. God is amazing at keeping his work running, even when lacking resources. Our time is one of those things that can be lacking. God can cover it. All right? If it's his work, he can make it happen. If God has commanded us to take a Sabbath, he knew that in advance that our system was going to be having this problem. Take a Sabbath. No, I can't do it. Anyway, I seriously, I struggle with this a lot, all right? So I'm not just preaching here from a person of, I always do it right. All right, so how do we do this? And this is one of those things where I wish we had a lot more time for you guys to talk with each other and tell your stories. How do we actually live this out? Because I know this is something that a bunch of us have worked through at different points in time. How can we be not stupid, but people of faith? Because sure, I don't need to back up my server. God will take care of it. Wait a second. There is a balance here. How can we still be people of faith? All right, so I've got a couple of short stories here. There was an organization that I was visiting, and they were giving me a tour of their organization, showing me this, that, and other thing. And as we were walking by their server rack, I heard a click, 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 click. Looking down, I said, that sounds like a busted hard drive. Click, click, click. And they were just wandering around, finished their tour, and I wandered back into their room, and I'm looking around, and sure enough, they actually had this, it was a small PC kind of a thing, not in their server. It was sitting on top of their server rack. Click, click, click. Huh, what's this? And I went around and I asked, and hey, you know what? That was their firewall. Their firewall was a home spun up Linux firewall, IP tables, rules, and stuff like that. And the hard drive had crashed. Now, Linux did a really good job in caching everything, and everything that it needed to run was cached enough that it just kept running. But their firewall was down. They just didn't know it. And I'm like, oh, but God allowed that thing to keep going. His work kept going, even though the firewall was down. Now, how many people, if your firewall was down, you'd think that was a big thing? Anyway. But it was probably a couple of months that was going on, and God kept it running. God can keep His work running. This is another one of those things. To this day, I still don't really understand. There was a DNS DHCP server that was managing this network. So it did all the DNS for the network, right? So DNS means if you're looking at Google, it's supposed to go out and get the DNS for Google. If you're looking at anything, it goes out and it gets it and it serves it to you. Well, its default route was itself. So to talk to the internet, it first sends its packet to itself, and then it takes that packet and sends it back to itself because it only knows to communicate to itself. All right? But it's the DNS for the whole organization. And it was working. And I came in and I looked at this and I'm like, and there was no VPN on it. There was no back door, but it was working. To this day, I have no clue how that was functioning. I know an awful lot about different technological things. I have no, it was working. All I can say is God had something. Maybe the entire DNS for the world was all cached. That's the only thing I can think of, was that it was all actually cached there. But it was working. Anyway. Well, I guess the other thing is that the organization maybe only had 2 websites that they went to, and those 2 were cached. All right.
Did it happen to be DJB DNS?
No, it was a Novell server for whatever it was working.
Is it maybe working via broadcast?
Was the point of that story for us to solve that problem?
Although we do.
What was the point then?
Has to solve it.
Yes, we would love to solve. When we get to heaven, God will say, you know how many angels I had writing DNS things down? The point is that nothing can hinder from saving, whether by many or by few. This is a Bible verse. This is true. It is, as techies, we have a very hard time believing this because we think that it requires us. We think it requires us. All right, and we need to be willing to let some things slide prayerfully and just kind of say, I've got to go out and do that street evangelism. That server can't stay down. Anyway, don't tell your boss I said this at ICCM. All right, so we're supposed to be obedient, but not lazy. Well, I don't feel like doing this today. No, it's a balance. But remember, taking a Sabbath is a command, not a suggestion. All right. Balancing work, talking about others. We need to remember that our coworkers have the same issues. They are being weary, overworked, disconnected, again, particularly all the more so during COVID. They need balance in their lives also. And so with this, we need to be sure to give them time, grace, and space. We know that we want time, grace, and space when dealing with tech stuff, because we've got all these emergencies and someone comes in and my mouse is busted. Well, yeah, but I've got the server down. We need to prioritize. When we're asking them for things as well, we need to also give that time, grace, and space. Do unto others as we would have them do unto us. All right. So I'm going to take a few minutes. This, again, comes from Tim Young's perspective, visiting a whole bunch of you. Every once in a while, there are times when the Lord is getting us weary, getting us discontented, getting us into a position where He actually is wanting to move us on. I don't want to say your goal is always to hold on tight and never let go, because sometimes God is trying to nudge you out of where He has you. And this is also an important thing to mention. We are told to seek the greater good. We are told to grow ourselves. And with that, we sometimes have to change roles. We need to be willing to adapt as our situation changes and as God nudges us. And so sometimes God is giving us a storm that we need to weather, and sometimes He's sending us that storm to kind of push us down a different path. So we exit when God is showing us something better to do, if God is telling us for sure to move on. And usually God will show us the new thing that we're supposed to be moving to before we have to close the old doors. Not always. Sometimes He has us step out in faith. I'm sending you down a new path. Abraham, I want you to start moving. I'm not going to tell you where. You're not going to see it yet. But start moving. Often in our group, what happens is family concerns is probably one of the biggest things I've seen, is people's health has, if parents or something like that has caused you to change locations, move around. Sometimes it's our family, our individual's health. There's a bunch of things like that. Finance, again, that's one of those things. Your support is down. Your organization says you can't stay. So that's when the Lord shuts the door. This is one of those things that again, I am outside of most people's organizations, and when I come through, an awful lot of people can say, oh, I can talk to Tim Young. I can share what's going on in my life. I've got these problems. Please, let's talk. And I do want to be that safe person to talk to. A whole bunch of you are in different organizations, and you can talk to each other as well. You've got friends here. And at these times, remember that you have friends. We don't want to exit just because we're angry. All right? Now, I just jump to the next thing here. The situation that caused the anger is maybe reason to leave. There may be a reason you're angry. There may be bad things going on, and it may be the appropriate thing to do. But we don't leave just because we're angry. Anger is an emotion, and emotions are strong. It's a symptom that there's something wrong, but it also clouds our judgment. And sometimes you have to work through the anger enough to get to the point where you can look at the situation to determine if it's actually the right reason to leave. So be careful of the emotions. And again, know that you have friends at ICCM. Talk through some of that. Another one is we shouldn't leave just because of a lack of motivation. If God is moving us onward, He'll show us what He wants to do next. We need to be praying for direction. But if we lack motivation, often that's because we're disconnected from various things. And let's see. I guess it's my next slide. I'll get this one here. Remember, you're God's tool. You need to know how you tick. Understand what motivates you and what doesn't, because often we can rebuild our motivation if we know how, if we understand some of the problems. But if we do leave and we're in a slump, you're more likely you're going to lose your community when you leave, you lose your accountability, and you lose your current purpose. You're leaving all of that behind, and unless you have something that you're moving to, you're going to even have less motivation when you've left. So it's important to understand why you're unmotivated before you just think about moving. It's best to move towards something instead of just away from something. All right, so again, the lack of motivation might mean something. The same way that our anger shows us that there's something wrong, the lack of motivation can be pointing us that there's something wrong. Lack of communication, lack of connectivity, not internet connectivity, people connectivity. God might be wanting you to seek greater gifts. He might be saying, the work that you're doing has been good, but you now have a different set of skill, understanding, talents. I want to move you on. There's a whole bunch of people who have been a part of our group who have moved on to management, who have moved, and I know techies we're talking about was the leader of JARS used to be a techie, and now he's the president or whatever of JARS. And God moves people on. Just because you're a techie now doesn't mean you're going to have the same set of responsibilities your whole life. Sometimes He wants you to have greater influence, do other things. So we need to seek to discern what God has for us, and again, talking to each other is a great way of doing that. All right, so in our last bit of time here, trying to discuss what helps you relax. How do you Sabbath? Understanding what gives you motivation. Those of us who have worked on that, who know that better, explain that to each other, because there's an awful lot of, when I was young, I didn't have a clue what made me excited. All I knew was sometimes I was excited and sometimes I wasn't. I have a much better understanding of that now. For those, has anyone here actually worked through burnout? Okay, we have a few, all right? For those who are drifting into that, know that some of your friends have done that and be willing to reach out to them. And again, just sharing that now when in your small prayer pals and stuff like that. Your prayer pals are people, whether you know it or not, you will remember them for longer than just the other people. The people that you sit and pray with. I have many times had my prayer pals, we have gotten back together again at different points throughout the year. So knowing what you've gone through in your group, these are your people that you may contact if you are struggling through with some of this stuff. You know what has caused lack of motivation. Often we have figured some of that out. And if you share it a little bit, it helps us think these things through. And for those who have refreshed your motivation, particularly those who have worked through burnout and have regrouped and bounded back in, those of us who haven't, it will help us when we get to that point as well. Because as I showed with the statistics early on, we're very likely to run into that in our lifetimes. All right, we don't really have much time for testimonies here, but later on in one of our sessions we'll have time for some sharing. So think about what you would share, and we'll have that, what's that? What time is that session, Kevin?
So 11 minutes.
11 to noon is the time when we're going to have there'll be some time for testimonies in that. All right. Yeah. So that's the end of my keynote.